Okay, and welcome back to my videos where I'm explaining route. This is the Eyrie Dynasties, or the Eagles, and these are the former leaders of the forest. They have been largely displaced by the Marquis de Cat's forces, and they're down to starting in a single clearing in the corner opposite the Cat's Keep at the beginning of the game that we're playing. So, a couple things. They score victory points a little differently, although they are building buildings. So again, they have a row of buildings. They build from the left. It refills back up. But rather than scoring points when the buildings are built, they score points at the end of every turn based on the most exposed space. So if you've built these 3 roosts, plus your starting one, which is already on the board, you'll be getting 3 victory points per turn, with a goal of 30 points. Obviously, that's 10 turns if you're not constrained, or if your roosts aren't gotten rid of. Excuse me. So special rules about the Eyrie Dynasties. We talked about ruling in the very first video, and normally if there's a tie between buildings and warriors, there's no ruler. But if the Eyrie Dynasties are a member of that tie, then they rule. So they basically rule in ties. Additionally, we saw some of the crafting cards could give you more than 1 victory point, but the Eagles are a little haughty about that, and so they only get 1 victory point for a single craft action, no matter how many points that particular craft is worth. So, how did they work? Well, the Eyrie has a leader, and that leader makes promises, and that promise is reflected in the decree at the top of the board. You can see we're starting out with 2 cards in the decree right now. These are loyal viziers, and these are cards that are specific to the Eagles. And right now they're starting out in move and build. And at the beginning of your turn, you'll continue to expand that decree, and as the run of your turn, you will actually execute on that decree as best as you are able. As long as you're able to execute the decree, no problem, you move on to your next turn. But when you get to the point when you cannot execute your decree, and it is almost a certainty that that will happen, then your leader is deposed, and you'll switch to a new leader. And you have a deck here of various leaders to choose from, each with their own special ability. In addition to changing leaders, there is, of course, some penalty for going into turmoil. And again, as you would expect, your board walks you through exactly how turmoil works. Essentially, you lose victory points based on how many birds are in your decree. You have to start over with a new set of decree, which means you're slowing way down. You get a new leader, and your turn immediately ends. So, what does a turn look like for the Eyrie? Well, let's talk through that. First thing, if you don't have any cards, you get one automatically. You got to have 1 card in your hand because you're going to have to add to the decree. You can add 1 or 2 cards to the decree, only one of which may be a bird. You may or may not add the second card if you choose. And then if you have no roosts, you get a roost and 3 warriors on the board. So if you ever get knocked off the board, you come right back on your next turn. So during daylight, you craft using roosts. If you watch the cat video, the cat craft using workshops, the birds craft using roosts. So depending on where their roosts are, and in this game they start with a roost in a rabbit clearing. In that scenario, they have 1 rabbit worth of crafting, and they can craft accordingly. As they build more roosts, they will have, wherever they have a roost, they have that 1 clearing, the suit of that clearing. They have that sort of capacity to craft, and there we go. So the next thing is, of course, just resolve the decree. So you go from left to right. You must do your multiple recruiting actions and close those out. You must move, you must battle, and you must build. And here's where the decree gets tricky. You're starting out with 2 cards in your decree. Both are birds, which are great. That's wild, as we talked about earlier. But as you add cards to your decree with suits, you're going to have to do those actions in those clearings. And recruiting must match the suit of the card. It's great, gets you extra warriors on the board, but it can only be done where you have a roost. So if you have to recruit in a clearing where you do not have a roost, or if you have to recruit twice in mouse clearings and you only have 1 mouse roost, you're gonna fail your decree and go into turmoil. Similarly with moving, in this case, the clearing that matters from the card is the clearing you're moving from, so you must rule a clearing in order to move. And again, that's a fairly big deal. So if you have a rabbit move card in here and you don't rule any rabbit clearings, you're not going to be able to move from a rabbit clearing, because you have to rule, unless you rule the destination that you're moving to, of course. But if you can't get there, then you fail the decree. Battling, you must battle in a clearing, matching the card in the decree. And lastly, building, and you build a new roost. So if you don't have presence in a clearing where you can build a roost, you're going to be, which in this case you have to rule. If you don't rule a clearing that doesn't already have a roost or doesn't match the suit or both, you're going to go into turmoil. And again, going into turmoil for the birds is bad. It will happen at least once in the game, most likely, possibly twice. And the fewer wild cards you use in your decree, the less penalizing it is in victory points, but it is a problem. So you want to avoid that, and it's pretty straightforward for the opponents of the Eyrie. Just keep their roost count down, and you can stifle them fairly effectively and force them into turmoil at some point or another. So there you go. And I'll be back in a minute with another video.